heavy metal to you, likely one of two things will come to mind. If you're a normal person, you'll think of sick guitar riffs, killer drums, and a wailing, screaming voice, typical of bands like Black Sabbath. But if you're like me, if you're one of my kindred spirits, you'll instead think of the magazine and is similarly named movie that was animated from the 80s, Heavy Metal, which had some Sammy Hagar vocals over the soundtrack and told stories of fantasy, science fiction, horror, and the weird, all with a very adult subject matter, even if certain things were a bit puerile at times. But this heavy metal magazine that inspired the movie was in fact based off of and featured a lot of translated stories from the original Metal Hurlant. Sorry, French listeners, for butchering that pronunciation, and I'll keep butchering pronunciations in French all video. But Metal Hurlant was an incredibly popular magazine from France that had these very adult stories collected in serialized periodical fashion, in addition to a number of one-off short stories. So I figured it would be the perfect continuation for Magazine May, my monthly read-through here of magazines all month in the comic book form. And Metal Hurlant is incredibly influential. I would point you towards Matt, that is Matt with 4 T's, who has a great documentary on Moebius, who is one of the founders of Metal Hurlant, the most significant artist probably to come out of that magazine. And his influence was incredibly wide-ranging, from American comics that read heavy metal and his works translated to Japanese artists in anime and manga, like Otomo, who was the mangaka behind Akira, that basically made anime a thing in America. It's one of the most influential stories of all time in that medium, in that format. And also animation figures like Miyazaki, similarly incredibly influential, legendary figure. So why did this magazine have such an outsized impact for what is essentially a regional comic? How did it end up taking over the world and influencing so much? Well, while I won't dig into the history, again, check out that documentary about Moebius that I pointed to you, I will look at the actual contents of Metal Hurlant number 1 to see just why these stories contained within were able to translate so well across the globe and still to this day. If this is your first time joining me here, welcome. My name is Steven, but you might better know me by my superhero alter ego, Spike Stonehand. And welcome to my channel, Divining Comics, where I explore the magic hidden between the panels of your favorite comics.
Boys and girls, your attention, please. Presenting a new exciting radio program featuring the thrilling adventures of an amazing and incredible personality.
Thank you for watching this video. So, what I do here is the Divining Comics 52 Comic Challenge, where I have devised a bunch of categories of comics designed to expand my knowledge of the breadth and depth of the medium across the globe and across time. So I'm picking things from different countries, different time periods, different regions in order to expand comics, because I love comics. I love reading them, and I love talking about them, and I love sharing my love of comics with other people. And I would love for you to participate in this journey. You can find a link to all 52 categories in the show notes, where you can follow along, pick your own comics to read, and tell me about them in the comments. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so in a few different ways. First, giving me a like, subscribing to the channel so you never miss an update. These two both really help share the comic across the YouTube algorithm, so my channel can grow and we can spread the love of comics that way. You can support me financially over on patreon.com/diviningcomics, where I'll put your name at the back of this video in the list of Patreon supporters. You can follow my writing at spikestonehand.com. I have a monthly new comic buyer's guide every week, and I have a roundup of the comics industry sharing news, reviews, and interviews that I found interesting. I love to share the love with other YouTube channels and podcasts that I actually listen to and think are worth your time. So you can check all of that out. That'll all be linked in the description of this video. But back to the subject at hand, Metal Hurlant number 1. So there's 2 figures in this magazine that's names come up over and over again, and that's Philippe Drouet and Mobius, like I already have mentioned. 2 of them were founders of the magazine. I think Drouet was the kind of editor-in-chief equivalent figure who would pick different artists that he wanted to have write stories. He would write stories for artists to draw. He would just find cartoonists that he thought were interesting and give them, let loose on the comic. And so those names are going to come up over and over again, and that's especially true in this first story, which was written by Drouet and drawn by Mobius, and it's called Approche du Centauri. It's a psychedelic story about some sort of astronaut who, as the ship is passing a strange star system, he has an out-of-body experience where he is kind of cast into this realm of seemingly demonic aliens that torture his psychic body before he is, pulled back into his real body. The story is, it's mostly, I think, just an excuse to get to Mobius's incredible art, and that's a thing you're going to be hearing me say over and over again today, is just I'm astounded how talented Mobius is. He's one of those figures that is a great, but then you actually read his stuff and it's even better than you would have thought. It's hard to overstate just how good Mobius's art here. In this story in particular, you can see his art style transition between the 2 modes, between this very hyper-detailed but very open at the same time white pages with black ink when he is the astronaut on the spaceship, that transitions to an incredibly realistic, slightly less cartoony, and very dense black pages when he is having the psychedelic experience. It's just incredible. This one artist is able to do so much within one story and have it work, much less the 2 or 3 other styles that we see him deploy over the course of this issue. And this story also sets up the theme of the best stories that I'll find in this magazine, is that even though there is dialogue, and I'm sure I'm missing nuances to what exactly this astronaut is doing, so much of it just works on the visual level that I'm able to pick up the story without really speaking any French at all. And I think that that's quite an incredible feat that continues on into the next story. It's called Route. It is written and drawn by Philippe Drouet, and it is another story about an astronaut having a strange encounter. This time it's with a giant mosquito-like alien that puts its proboscis onto the ship, sending off these little smaller aliens that the astronaut has to fight off. He hits the turbo, which in what is going to be again a theme of this series, it burns the crotch of the giant evil alien, and unfortunately for this astronaut, one of the little guys gets him and seemingly impregnates him. Fills him with the little alien bug eggs. And, this is kind of the bit of the puerile humor that I had mentioned earlier. It's a little silly. The art is a little scratchier. It's not as... it's hard to be sandwiched between a bunch of different Mobius drawn stories, because even if you're really good, you're not going to be Mobius most likely. And so I think the art kind of suffers in comparison a little bit. The story, like I said, it's a little silly, a little juvenile, so it's not drawing me in that way, but it's still a very good story, and I can understand exactly what's going on within it. And so I think that that's a plus to just how well done on a visual level, even if the art isn't a 10 out of 10, right? It's like, oh, hey, this is an 8 out of 10, very solid artwork. and that's, sometimes that's all you need. The third story in this bunch is a little 2-pager by Mobius. It's called Split. It's about a lonely astronaut who makes a attractive female robot, presumably with salacious intentions, but this robot, because she is sentient, does not like that's why she was designed, and she kicks the astronaut in the crotch, and he runs away. And it's just a fun little gag comic, nothing too crazy here. But again, I am just so impressed by Mobius's art here. This time, it's a totally different style than the one before. This is much more very simple, broad cartooning. Kind of reminds me of Far Side by Gary Larson, which I would be fascinated to know if there was an intentional connection there historically, right? If Gary Larson was drawing from Moebius when he was doing The Far Side, that would be really cool to learn. But I don't actually know if there's anything there. But it is that kind of broad cartooning, and at the same time, he's able to be so expressive with the faces. He's able to, with just a few simple lines, create depth and shading with some light hatch work. It's could not be more different than the previous story that Mobius drew in this magazine, and then indeed the future stories that were drawn by him. And yet it just visually works on such a perfect level. I am astounded at just how good Mobius is at this point in his career. And now we get to the story of Metal Hurlant. If you have seen a visual from this magazine, it is from this. It is the great Arzak, again cartooned by Moebius. It has some strange, perhaps knight, riding a pteranodon-like being, and he's wearing these strange uniform with crazy hats, and he is fighting these kind of primitive, savage guards who are protecting what he thinks is a beautiful lady trapped in a tower. But by the time he defeats the guards and goes back to the princess, it finds out that she was only beautiful from the neck down, and from the head up, she is an ugly alien, and so he leaves unsatisfied. But this story, my mind is blown. You have to read this. If you read one thing from this magazine, look up Arzak. The colors are astounding, more intricate and detailed than anything I can think of from this same time in American mainstream comics like Marvel and DC. It's very painterly, and I guess you can only really get that probably with magazine printing instead of the 4-color printing at the time that American comics had for their newsstand comics. It's told almost entirely, I think entirely silently, wordlessly. You can see why this story was so popular across the globe in Japan and America, because it didn't need anything to translate. You get 100% of the story just by looking at it. It's pure cartooning. It's astounding. Another interesting thing that I love about this story is how it feels like we're jumping into the middle of something that is already established. We don't really know who this figure is. We don't really know what the planet is, but it doesn't really need that. It makes you want to know more. It draws you in because it's just good storytelling on that front. And there are so many images from this that are iconic, right? The classic Mobius knight figure here, who has a hat that would rival some of Jack Kirby's legendary creations. The pteranodon that he is flying across. There's the bones of a giant dragon or dinosaur that remind me obviously of more recent things like the Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild games. It's just, I can't state how powerful and how impressive this story is. You need to check it out. If you take one thing away from this video, it's check out Arzak. The fourth story in this magazine is called Argorn. It is cartooned by Philippe Drouillet, and I think this is unfortunately my least favorite of all the stories in this issue. It was very more reliant on the dialogue, on the wording to know what's going on. In fact, I caved and ended up reading a translated version in American English so that I could even understand what's going on. And even still, I don't think that it was my favorite in the bunch, but it tells the story of this kind of warrior who has been eternally damned to relive the sins of his past, of the murders that he committed over petty jealousies and power seeking. And it just it's the storytelling visually is a little muddied for me, even as there are some really cool images. There's things that I don't quite understand why, for example, some of the characters seem, monstrously deformed in a way that doesn't actually come up plot wise. Like, are they, am I supposed to just be horrified by them, even though, as the story goes, they're not the real villain? There was a lot that was confusing about this to me, even in the translated version. And while, like, for example, the Eldritch Knight at the beginning of the story that has damned this poor soul to his eternal suffering looked really cool. There, I think, wasn't enough here for me to hang my hat on. So, like I said, this was my least favorite of the bunch. And yet, still, I am sure that if you look it up, there's going to be tons of people that this is one of their favorite stories of all time, because it is, there is some cool moments in it, but just for me, it was not my favorite. Fifth story in the bunch, I was kind of surprised to see. It's a Richard Corbin story. It's a Sid Opie, it's a very Richard Corbin-esque. If you've read much of his stuff, mostly what I'm familiar is obviously the Hellboy stories that he drew, and I'm sure that's probably true for a lot of you, but he obviously has his own vast career. Den, which Dark Horse has put out some lovely hardcovers for. They've been putting out kind of the full Richard Corbin oeuvre over the past year or two, so definitely recommend checking that out. But here you get the story of these two kind of alien beings, Sid and Opie. They are in love. They procreate together. There's a small monster that attacks them, and Sid has to violently fight it off in order to protect Opie. And then all of a sudden, at the end of the issue, bam, a giant being that doesn't even comprehend the existence of Sid and Opie stomps on poor Opie, leaving Sid alone and sad and heartbroken. And this was such a weird story. I was really into it. The idea of these small little beings that are full of intelligence and some romance and feeling, and yet they're not even an afterthought of these other giant beings that aren't evil even, or like a Cthulhu-esque old god. They're not malicious. They just don't care. They don't recognize you. They the way that a human might view an ant. These beings are to Sid and Opie. The art itself, it's if you've read any Richard Corbin, it looks a lot like that. You have these naked beings with exaggerated, sexual features. You have these cool, weird-looking monsters. You have, it's not, I don't think, painted yet, but it is really well done visually with the colors and the way that it's all wrapped in a package. It looks like nothing else you've ever seen. It looks like Richard Corbin, and I think that he's definitely an artist that I think deserves more mainstream popularity than he ever got, because his style is just so unique and influential. I think a lot of one of his Den stories was in fact used in the heavy metal animated movie that I mentioned before. Yeah, you should check out Richard Corbin if you've never checked out any of his work before. We got another Mobius. This time it's just a one-pager. It's called like Le Mystère de Eroticisme or something like that. I wonder what that translates to. And it's just kind of a metaphor, abstract version of what it's like to be in love, and let's say maybe even a little bit more puerilely attracted to somebody. And Mobius compares it to taking some sort of psychedelic drug and experiencing the wonders of the universe. It's here. It looks cool. It's just one page. There's not a whole lot to talk about here. So let's move on to the final story of the bunch, which is, the final story is Les Armées du Concordat. It's written by Jean-Pierre Dionnet, and it is drawn by Jean-Claude Gall. And this tells the story of a conquering army that comes into a magnificent kind of fantasy city. Giant stone buildings and mysterious passageways. The people, for some reason, don't put up any resistance. They just let themselves be conquered. But then slowly the conquering army becomes succumbed to this magic of the city, and they, go native. They give up the trappings of the military and kind of, don't no longer wish to fight. This was the art on this. Let me start with that. It's the most positive thing here is that this looks beautiful in black and white. I would recommend checking out a black and white version. I saw that there also is a colored version that was in the translated version that I ended up having to look up to kind of quite understand all of the story here, and I think that that's less good than the original black and white, so definitely check that out. Like I said, this is the art is it's very adventure serial-esque. If you've ever read any of the old newspaper comic adventure serials that would have, full page stories of fantasy, of adventure, and this definitely is in that vein. The story itself, has kind of left me confused at certain points. Again, even in the translated version, like, why does everybody kind of just give up? It's mysterious and not really like explored at all. I kept seeing people refer to this as an anti-war story, and I didn't really get that, other than just the fact that you were showing at first the conquering army do the awful things that conquering armies do, especially to women. But yeah, I was left a little cold by the story, but the art itself, if you just want to flip through and look at something beautiful, this is a great story for that. If you just want the mood board of a story, check this out. Maybe I know that there were future installments of this series, The Conquering Armies. So maybe if I read more of those, I would get some more out of the story. But as it is, it was a visual feast. So wrapping up, let's gather our thoughts on this. What did I like and not like about Metal Hurlant #1? Obviously, the artwork throughout was impressive. The storytelling, especially in the stories that weren't either written by Moebius or Richard Corbin, left me a little cold at times. There was a lot more, 1 or 2 page gag comics than I would have expected. I would have expected, kind of more ongoing stories, or one off, like you would find in old EC comics, for example, that just tell a full story in 5 pages, but less of that than I would have expected. It was a lot more 2-page gags. So overall, I do highly recommend checking this out. There are scanned copies of this issue available on archive.org that you can read in the original French. Especially if you read French, that you might get a lot out of this. So would I continue reading Metal Hurlant? I don't know if I would keep reading individual magazines, which is, I think, going to be a theme during this month of Magazine March. But I do really want to keep reading works by Moebius and by Richard Corbin. Their little sampler here has more than impressed me. I would love to keep reading more works by either of those authors, and I think, little spoiler alert, I plan on reading some more by Moebius during this 52 Comics Challenge, so let's keep an eye out for that. Who would I recommend this for? Obviously, if you like science fiction, fantasy, the weird, and kind of that, all of that inflicted through a lens of horror at times, this is your stuff. This is the bread and butter of that. There's so much that you probably like today that was influenced by this, and a lot of this holds up, so definitely do recommend checking out if you're a fan of any of those genres. If you like the movie Heavy Metal, hey, check out the thing that inspired it, right? And finally, if you just like beautiful comic art, this one magazine has loads of it, more than you can even really comprehend in a single reading. The artwork on this is definitely the key selling point, and if that's your thing, check this out. You must. I implore you to read Heavy Metal, to look at the works of Moebius, of Richard Corbin, and of Jean-Claude Gall. All of those art drawings were very highly recommended by me. I enjoyed my time reading Metal Hurlant, and I would like to continue reading more of these works by influential French comics artists. So join me in that journey, if you will, by, like I said at the beginning of the video, subscribing so you never miss an update, and giving this video a like. Thank you for watching my channel, and as always, never let the magic of comics die.
Old Enoch, he lived to be 365 when the Lord came and took him back to heaven alive. I saw the light from heaven shining all around. I saw the light come shining, I saw that light come down.